So, I am here in Texas and I've been enjoying a little tour, a speaking tour all around Texas, and then I'll be headed out um, into some other areas in the Midwest, speaking on this whole story of the Black classical tradition. And what I'm about to share with you, I tried to figure out how to put it in a tweet, and it would have just been too long. I thought about how to put it in a Facebook post that I thought would have been long too. Thought about a blog post, which would have been long, and instead I settled on a video. I really want to have time to unpack something that God is revealing to me. And I think it's important. I talk a lot about the story of what brought me into studying classics and its relevancy to the Black community. I talk about my parents' school, working there, and all of that. But there's one part of the story that I have not told, not intentionally so. At first, it seemed like a really small detail until this past weekend that I think is important for me to say because I don't know who's listening to this, but if you are in a position as children in the background, if you are in a position where you're constantly speaking, like maybe you're a pastor, a minister, a traveling minister who speaks to thousands of people, I just thought it would be important it's important to know that you may not ever know how your words are changing the life of someone and actually setting them on the path towards their destiny and calling in life. You may never meet that person. That person may never be able to thank you and hug you and honor you for how your words that you spoke in a certain moment changed their life and led them to fulfilling their purpose. So this video is created for Priscilla Shirer. Now, I don't know Priscilla Shirer. We met one time on a Christian cruise that Tony Evans was speaking at, and my dad is a pastor, and we were all there together. And we were children, somewhere between late elementary, early teens, late teens, I guess. I know she and I were not in college. My brother was in college, so I'm going to say I was somewhere in 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, which would have her about the same place. And we were just kind of running around the boat together. Yeah, I think we were the only young people on this Christian cruise. And she was nice, but we went our separate ways and we never spoke again. And I've never had any contact with her. Fast forward to 15 years ago, I went to a women's conference. Um, and at the time, I was a new graduate assistant at the University of Maryland. I'd only been doing it for about a year. And I had remission of tuition. They give you a really nice stipend. And I felt that I was on a path to really find my way into academia as a career as a result of the work I was doing and how things were going for me in the department and in those early days of my doctoral program. But I was also teaching part time at this point at my parents' classical school. And I had just started to identify this growing passion. When I started my PhD, I was going to research the importance of arts in education, and it had nothing to do with classics or classical learning at all. Performing arts is my initial background. And I thought I was going to make a life of that and then go on to teach at the university level in this field. And University of Maryland had just kind of launched a arts and education uh, um, program that I was looking forward to hopefully be a part of and have, be part of research projects that supported this new thing. Well, around the same time that all of that was happening, my parents opened their school. I went to work part time for them. I started my doctoral program at some point in the years following, and in those early years following, and I began to wrestle inside that researching arts and education was not what I was called to do, and that was really hard for me because my passion has always been my entire life music and drama. That's where my mind was. And then with my love for children and education, I wanted to marry the two and do two things. I wanted to start a children's theater where I could teach about literature and Black history and all that stuff um, to children through the arts. And then I wanted to teach teachers on how to use the arts in the core classes, history, literature, all the subjects. That was where I was set. And the University of Maryland was excited to have me with that because they had this program that was in arts and education was becoming was a really growing movement. And so I was accepted into my doctoral program with the understanding that that would be my work. And they were also interested in me connecting that work to something called the Writer's Workshop. So I would go to the Writer's Workshop, and I think that's what it's called. And I would help my supervising professor with any weekend workshops he was doing and all of that. And then I was assigned to another professor who was into literacy education, and I was just they were trying to find a way to kind of bring that into that, and just that's where I was. But again, there was I was at the time working at my parents' school, and had started to work in the Great Books class, eventually took it over as the full Great Books teacher, and I was feeling very conflicted. I was like, what is happening when these Black students read this literature? And it had nothing to do with Black history. At the time, I did not know about the Black classical tradition. I did not know about its relevancy to Black people. What drew me to Great Books was its power in the students I was working with. I'm learning to understand what's happening now, of course. But at that time, just like Great Books affected me, as soon as I gave this literature to my students, their mentalities also began to change. Their perspectives began to change. And I was just really fascinated by that. And which is another reason why I was drawn to research this through this method called phenomenology, because phenomenology says something odd catches your attention, and you go on this journey to unpack what that is all about in a real narrative, qualitative way. Anyway, so that's where I was. And then a professor that I was not working under noticed that I was wrestling. She could tell that I was always talking about classical education and these students reading Great Books literature. And she said, I have this feeling that you're supposed to research this, that this is probably what your dissertation should be on. I said, but I was accepted under performing arts. And she says, yeah, I know. I said, if I leave that, I don't think it's going to go over very well with the department. She said, you're right. I said, and everybody wants me to research XYZ. She said, you're right. And she said, the thing about you have to realize is that all of these professors here who want you to do what they want you to do already have their PhD and were given the freedom to pursue what was interesting to them. I know you don't want to disappoint them, but you have the freedom and the right to research what is interesting to you. And I want to really encourage you to make sure you follow your heart. Okay. So she says that to me. I mentally say, oh God, she's right. And I was afraid because I knew once I changed my research focus, my journey into the doctoral program was going to be very perilous. So that weekend, not too long after she and I had that conversation, I go away on a women's retreat where Priscilla Shirer is the main speaker. And there are two things that happen at this retreat. The first thing is really what this video is about. The second thing I'll mention, but this is not what the video is about. On the first night, she says, this is the first night. This is right after me and that professor had that conversation. Priscilla Shirer, I can't remember what she was teaching about, but at the end, as she's heading into the prayer time, she says, there is someone out in this audience, I just feel it, that feels the Lord is calling them to something. And to accept that calling, you'd have to give up everything. She said, maybe it's a career. Maybe it's something financial. I don't know what it is, but God is telling you to do something, and it's going to cause a great sacrifice for you to do it. And if you feel that is you, I want you to come down front. I'm going to pray for you. At this point, I had tears streaming down my face, and I knew God was telling me what to do. And I went down front. I knelt down. She could never pick me out in a crowd, okay? We did not have any type of special sister to sister moment in that moment, right? As a matter of fact, I barely even saw her because I was crying. But I was knelt down and she walks past me. She didn't ask what I needed prayer over. She just prayed a quick prayer that God would give me the strength to obey this call, that whatever it is God had me to do. And I went back to my seat. We finished that night, that first night. I go back to my room, and in that moment, I resigned from my assistantship at the University of Maryland. I remember the peace I felt and the extreme fear I felt. And in that letter, I said, I have decided that I will no longer keep my grad assistantship and work for the University of Maryland. I will just take my classes. I'm not withdrawing from the program, but I have decided that I'm going to go full-time teaching at this small classical school where I've been working part-time. When I came back, okay, so then there was that. Then I'll say this next one. And then the second day she preached or taught, she said, someone out there has a desire in their heart. They want God to give them X, Y, something. Maybe it's a husband. Maybe it's a this. Maybe it's a that. Come down front. I want to pray for you. I'm not kidding. This is like, I'm totally not making this up. And mine was I wanted a husband at the point. And not only was I struggling with my career choices, but I was very lonely. I really wanted to meet a good man of God to marry. So I went down front. And again, she walked past me. I don't think she really looked at me. And she just said her prayer and she went on with life. Okay. I came home that weekend. By the end of that next week, I met my husband. And also at the next week, when I resigned, I was rejected by many professors in my department. Rejected in the terms of, I wasn't put out of the program. I was still able to stay, but my advisor decided he was not interested in my topic. His words exactly, why would you want to research something about a whole bunch of dead white men? He was very frustrated with me. The professor who I served as his grad assistant had the same concerns. He was a lot more volatile in his confrontation of me, and I had to continue to finish out my time there working for him until the end of the semester. So he spent his time berating me in front of his students very openly, and it was a very traumatic experience. And I'm not going to go into the details of things he said, but he said horrible things to me, about St. John's and all of that in front of students he was teaching. As an example of saying, this is what you shouldn't do in academia. Don't do what she's doing. She's not that smart. It was just a really horrible experience. And it was in that moment that I know the devil wanted to use that experience to crush me, to make me quit. Because it's amazing how I obeyed God. Priscilla Shirer gave me kind of this commission. And I felt it was the voice of God speaking through her. But the first thing that happened was this attack on this decision openly in front of students at the University of Maryland by a professor I deeply respected and was working for. And I know the devil wanted to use that to make me say, okay, I think I made the wrong choice. I'll go back to what I was doing. And I remember sitting there and I looked at him. And in that moment, he would just berate me and just glare at me. And I know he wanted me to respond like the typical angry Black woman, to storm out, to talk back to him and just really show out. And that naturally I would normally do something like that in that type of a situation. But I heard the Spirit of God say, be quiet. Like, don't say anything, which is not natural for me. So I glared at him. I said nothing. I just sat there and just did like this, fighting tears the whole time. I successfully held back the tears just barely behind my eyelids. He dismissed class. I ran down the hall weeping. And I just prayed. I said, God, what am I supposed to do? I'm so angry. I feel so helpless. And I heard the Spirit of the Lord say, don't say anything. Pour all your anger into your writing and your research. And I vowed in that moment that I was going to prove that man wrong, that this literature was relevant to Black people, that I was not, that my people deserved to know this story. And I didn't even know what the story was. I had no idea what the Black classical tradition was. But I was going to prove to him that it was relevant to all people, especially Black people. And I said, I'm going to pour my anger into my writing. And thus began a journey. Not too long after that is when I discovered Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk, which led me into the Black classical tradition. And I spent years reading everything I could and then cross-referencing it to whenever I would read a Black author who cited a classic text, I would find that classic text. Then I would teach it at the school I was working at now. And then I would write about it. And I would just keep every little journal and document and just document, catalog every time a Black author would reference a canonical work. And I did this over a long year period. And because of a lot of things, I got married to the man that came a week after Priscilla prayed over me. And I got pregnant over and over and over again. I kept missing deadlines as I kept getting pregnant. But then the other piece that happened to me is as a result of me choosing to not let go of this research interest, there were a group of professors who actively were trying to keep me from finishing. But because of another professor who was white, telling me this and then giving me advice on how to navigate this resistance, that is how I was able to progress. And eventually God led me to a wonderful advisor and chair of my committee. Okay, that's a very long story made short. So I continue this work. I continue this research. I continue to write everything, every paper I wrote in my classes, anything I did was about this topic of the Black classical tradition and its relevancy. And I would go back and forth between what I was seeing in my students and how it reminded me of what happened with Frederick Douglass. What I was seeing in my students, how it reminded me of what happened with Phyllis Wheatley. What I would see in my students and how it reminded me of what happened with Anna Julia Cooper when she read it, and so on. And Huey P. Newton and all these people you all hear me talk about. I came up with these as a result to deal with pain I was dealing with as people were rejecting me in academia. And people say, well, why didn't you report? For me, I felt God was saying, don't say anything because you cannot be distracted from this research I want you to do. If you get into being an activist and crying out about how people are treating you in the department, then you're not reading and researching. The best way to combat them is to bring out truth. And so no one knew. I purposely did not talk about it, protest about it, cry out about it. I kept a brave face. I smiled and was respectful to everyone. That's not how I typically function, but in this case, this is something God wanted me to do. And so I made it through. And I finished my PhD. My parents' school closed. I went on to be a principal of another classical school. I did that for 2 years. And then I ended up starting my own classical school, which now is open for 7 years. And we recently just decided to be a virtual school. The virus made us do that, but we realized we were able to reach more students throughout the United States by remaining virtual, but creating community virtually. But we still needed a home base. And Maryland said that we could not stay virtual and be a legitimate Maryland state school. So we moved to Virginia. That's a whole nother story. You have to watch that video. It was a rough one too. But we moved to Virginia, who welcomed us with open arms, and we found a building and we're there. And I leased this building, signed the lease just before coming here for this speaking tour. And the way God did it, the way we were brought into this building and into Virginia was in such a supernatural way that I came into Texas this week still in a state of awe. The building isn't even furnished yet. My sign isn't even up yet. I set everything up, got all the paperwork done, and we're a legal entity in Virginia. And we have our home, our building, and that lease is signed. And I had prayed that God would allow me to fix all this before I came to Texas, which He did right at the last minute. Everything was set. Flew out here. I told the landlord the building's going to look empty because I have to go on tour. I will be setting it up as soon as I get back. She was like, thank you so much for letting me know. And that's how this is happening. So I come to Texas because God told me, don't set up this building. Don't do anything. Just sign the lease and go to Texas for this tour. Wait until you come back. I speak in Austin. And then I decided to go visit my cousin in Dallas. And she says, I have found that Priscilla Shirer is speaking when you come to Dallas. So we get picked up from the bus station. I took the bus from Austin to Dallas, and we call where Priscilla will be speaking to see will we make it in time. And he said, I think you'll make it because I think she's speaking at the end. So we get to the house, we drop our things off, we freshen up, we run to go hear Priscilla Shirer. It's almost 5:00 at this point. We walk into the building, and the security guard says, you just getting here? It's about over. It ends at 6. I think you've missed everything. Again, I think it was just the enemy trying to keep us from getting a word. And she and I looked very disappointed. And I said, you know what? Let's just keep going in. Maybe God will give us something. Maybe somebody's saying one word that's just for us. So we go inside the auditorium. We run up the stairs. And just as we get up the stairs and look over the balcony, The guy says, and now, ladies and gentlemen, Priscilla Shirer. I didn't know what Priscilla was going to say, but I'm recognizing this pattern, and I felt that she had a word for me. Her word is the one that led me to quit what I was doing at the University of Maryland for my doctorate and come onto the classical education path. And I felt God had a word for her, from her to me, before I go back to Maryland, back to Virginia, to start setting up this building that I want to be a center where we will celebrate the relevancy of classics and the canon to all of humanity. A space filled with love and care and just this welcoming space where we can dialogue together, whether we agree or disagree. And I feel that's what God wants me to do. It's actually in the last chapter of my dissertation that I want to do this. And He's given me this space in Old Town Alexandria. But I still didn't have quite a lot of clarity, and I had a lot of fear. Everything I've done has been always accompanied with fear and high levels of insecurity. And if I ever seem like I'm confident in one thing, and that's that I'm just doing what God has told me to do. Most times I don't feel in and of myself confident. I'm confident only in God. And so my level of insecurity and fear and doubt had gone up pretty high. Even as I signed the lease, I'm thinking, God, I don't even know what you want me to do. I just know you're telling me, but I feel insecure. Like, what if this doesn't work? What if we sign this lease? And even though my husband and I can afford it, just what if nobody comes? What if it's not used? Just doubt, the devil talking to me like about these things. And God knew I was scared. He knew I had doubt. So I come and I hear Priscilla Shirer speak, and she talks about Simon casting his nets and how those times he was doing it without God, it was empty. But then when Jesus got in the boat and he had to cast that net again, how the net was filled with more fish than he could handle. When God closed the door for me to stay in Maryland, which is really what I wanted to stay, it's my community, it's PG County. I had a special love for serving the Black community right there. And He moved me to Virginia. I was relieved that our school would remain open, that we had a home, but I was sad that I was not in my community. And I questioned God about that. Why would you take me from my community? As a Black woman, I teach at Howard. As a person who's trying to bring this classical tradition to all people, my heart is to bring it to my people. And I loved being in PG County. I loved being in this space where students who would normally get it could come to me and get this type of education. So moving into Virginia was hard for me. But I knew I had to do what God was telling me to do. It's the only door He had opened for me. And thank God it's close enough to that same neighborhood that they can still get to me. And then I'm online, and so people can still get to me. But I still felt hurt about that. And she talked about how Peter had to basically step aside so Jesus could get in the boat. And I had to let go of Maryland. And Jesus got in the boat with me. And He said, "You're going to Virginia." And then she broke down that story to show that when we have Jesus in the boat with us, no matter how impossible our call may seem, no matter how insecure or inadequate we may feel in what we are doing, if Jesus is in the boat with you, He's going to bless the work He's called you in ways that you could never imagine. And as she's ending her sermon, I felt almost that she saw me. But she couldn't have seen me because I'm all the way up in the nosebleed seats. But she looks out in our direction and she says, when Simon caught his fish, he gives his life to Jesus and he became a fisher of men. And she began to challenge me that as God does the impossible in my life, that whatever call I have, ultimately, my calling is to fulfill the purpose He has for me. And then she said, "Now you go and you do it." And she got off the stage. So here, the first time I decided to leave the path I was on to go into classical education, knowing that white people would have a hard time with it, knowing that black people would have a hard time with it. I was afraid of that. But I go to that conference that first time, and Priscilla Shirer tells me, without seeing me, you got to do what God is telling you to do, no matter the sacrifice you're making. Then I come to Dallas filled with fear, so much insecurity, because I know that what I'm sharing can seem controversial, and people are trying to figure out what political side she's on, whose side is she on, and who does she favor, white or black people? Is she trying to be an Uncle Tom? Is she this? Is she that? And I'm none of those things. And I don't want to hurt people, and I don't want to offend people, and I don't want to alienate anyone. I just want to share this simple story and revelation that I feel God gave to me, so that it can be a blessing to any and everyone, whether you believe in God or not, whether you look like me or not, whether you vote like me or not. That this truth I'm being given is important for all of us to know. But there's insecurity associated with that because we live in such tense times. And so I came to Texas full of fear and anxiety, to the point where I almost felt physically sick. But God has given me strength to speak and to do what He's telling me to do. And then I go to hear Priscilla Shirer. I take a small break between my speaking engagements to get a word from Priscilla Shirer, telling me I don't have to be afraid. Telling me, reminding me that I'm doing what God has told me to do, and that He is with me in the boat. And He's going to bless what I'm doing. And just as He then took Peter from catching fish to blessing people, He is able to do the same through me in this work that I'm doing. So I don't know if Priscilla Shirer will ever hear this, but I think you need to know that somewhere in the United States, there was another chocolate sister that in two very key moments within a 15-year span of time, God has used your ministry to speak into my life and to fill me with the power of the Holy Spirit to do something that feels so hard. And I just want you to know that I thank you. You inspire me, you bless me, and I thank you. And that's the story of how Priscilla Shirer has played a key role in the work that I'm doing.